They laughed when she walked in. A foreign woman. Alone. No entourage, no reputation they recognized. Park Jin-dae's lieutenants, 7 men who had ordered executions over cold tea, looked at her like she was a mistake. One of them spat at her boots. Another muttered, "Desperate gamble," under his breath. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She reached into her jacket and dropped a handful of spent shell casings onto the lacquered table, each one engraved, each one carrying a name, each name belonging to someone the world believed had died of natural causes. Then she looked Jin-dae dead in the eyes. "You aren't paying for my protection. You're paying for their funerals." The room went silent. Outside, Seoul hummed with neon and secrets. Inside that tea room, something ancient shifted. 7 men who had never been afraid of anything felt it for the first time. This is not a story about mercy. This is the night Seoul learned what a ghost looks like. Before we go further, if you're drawn to high-stakes crime stories where power shifts in a single night, hit that like button and subscribe right now. This story only gets darker from here. Don't say I didn't warn you. Park Jin-dae didn't build the Gonhwa Syndicate with luck. He built it with patience, blood, and a code of honor so absolute that even his enemies respected the rules. For 30 years, the Iron Emperor had been untouchable, not because he was the most dangerous man in Seoul, but because everyone knew what touching him would cost. But iron was cracking. In the last 24 hours alone, 3 attempts on his life. A rigged elevator shaft, a poisoned meal caught only because his food taster collapsed before Jin-dae lifted his chopsticks. A sniper round that missed his skull by 4 centimeters. 4. And punched clean through the headrest of his chair. Someone had activated the red sun. A dark web bounty so large it didn't just attract assassins, it attracted governments, rival syndicates. Ghost operatives who hadn't taken a contract in years were suddenly sharpening blades. And the worst part? His own security was compromised. Someone on the inside was opening doors. Which door? Which man? He didn't know. Tradition had kept Jin-dae alive for 3 decades. Now tradition was the thing trying to kill him. Because every man around him moved the old way, thought the old way, trusted the old way. The new world had sensed something he had never faced before, so someone in that room, quietly, carefully, suggested hiring a ghost. Her name was Zora Vance, former Delta Force, burned by the CIA. Officially deceased as of 3 years ago, a file closure that she had arranged herself. She had been living in the margins of Itaewon, invisible by design, waiting for the one contract that would buy her complete erasure from every kill list on Earth. This was that contract. When she walked into the tea room, the laughter was immediate. 7 lieutenants who had never lost a fight in their lives looked at a black woman standing alone in tactical gear and saw nothing worth worrying about. That was their first mistake. She said nothing. She moved to the table with the calm of someone who had already decided how the room ended. Then she reached into her jacket and placed the shell casings down, one by one, like punctuation at the end of sentences nobody else could read. Each casing carried a name. Each name was a person officially dead from natural causes, heart attacks, strokes, tragic accidents. Zora had written every one of those causes. Then she slid a tablet across the table. Live feed. Jin-dae's own internal security cameras, angles his guards didn't even know existed. "I walked in here twice before you saw me," she said. "Your men aren't looking for a war. They're already losing one." She looked at Jin-dae. "You aren't paying for protection. You're paying for their funerals." Jin-dae studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in 30 years, the Iron Emperor deferred to someone else in his own room. He signed the contract. The countdown began. 72 hours until Red Sun went fully active. Zora didn't wait. Within the hour, she was back in the city, deep in the Itaewon underground, moving through layers of Seoul that didn't appear on any map. off-book technology brokers, silent allies who owed her debts older than their current identities, suppliers who asked no questions because they had learned long ago that questions cost more than silence. She needed pressure sensors, micro-drone jammers, acoustic disruptors, things that didn't exist in any legitimate inventory. She found all of it before midnight. But someone was watching. The first scouts appeared in the neon-lit alleys near Hooker Hill. 2 motorcycles running parallel, too disciplined to be street traffic. They weren't sent to kill her, not yet. They were sent to confirm she existed, to verify the rumor that Jin-dae had actually hired the ghost. Zora noticed them in the reflection of a convenience store window. She said nothing. She kept walking. Then the chase began, a savage, high-speed pursuit through Seoul's back arteries. Tight corners, market stalls, underground parking structures where the lights had been out for years. She lost them in 4 minutes. But she let one escape, on purpose. Because Zora understood something most operatives never learned. Fear travels faster than bullets. Let one man run. Let him tell the others what he saw. Let the doubt spread through their ranks like smoke before the fire even starts. By the time she was back at the mountain estate, the whisper networks were already moving. Zora Vance is real. She's here. She's already working. Good. She needed them afraid before they were dead. The mountain estate was old, traditional, built in the way Jin-dae believed in, stone, wood, ceremony. Zora walked every corridor twice. Then she started dismantling it, not destroying it, redesigning it, turning 300 years of architecture into the most sophisticated kill environment she had ever built. Pressure-sensitive flooring in the eastern garden. Step wrong, and you don't trigger an alarm. You trigger a consequence. Blind corridors rerouted with mirrored panels that disorient in darkness. Psychological triggers, sounds, smells, lighting shifts, engineered to fracture a trained soldier's composure at the exact moment it mattered most. She flooded the basement level and rerouted the drainage. She mapped every structural weak point and turned them into advantages. She placed nothing randomly. Every element served 2 functions, one visible, one lethal. Jin-dae watched from the courtyard, arms folded. "This isn't a fortress anymore," he said quietly. "No," Zora replied, not looking up from her work. "It's bait." He was unsettled, not because he doubted her, but because he was beginning to understand that she wasn't thinking about defense at all. She wasn't planning how to protect his life. She was designing funerals. 60, 70 of them. Prearranged. Efficient. The trap was set before sunrise. Now they waited. If you're still watching, you already know this night isn't ending quietly. Drop a comment right now. Would you trust Zora Vance with your life? Because the men climbing that mountain are about to find out what happens when you don't. They came at dusk, quietly. A 10-man stealth unit, the kind of team that had cleared compounds in 4 countries without leaving a single witness. Specialists in silent entry, masters of the dark. They moved through the outer gardens like smoke, communicating in hand signals, trusting their training completely. That trust killed them. There were no gunshots, no alarms, no obvious moment where things went wrong, because Zora had made sure the trap didn't feel like a trap until it was already over. The pressure floors, the rerouted paths that led deeper instead of forward, the acoustic disruptors that made every sound feel like it was coming from the wrong direction. 10 men entered the property. None reached the house. 1 survived, barely. He crawled back to the tree line, past the bodies of his team, and kept screaming long after he had run out of words for what he had seen. Inside the estate, Jin-dae's remaining lieutenants watched on the security feed in absolute silence. One of them turned to look at Zora. She was already reviewing the next wave's approach on her tablet. She hadn't even stood up. Then the heavy units arrived, and the silence ended. Void 9. Not a syndicate, not a cartel. A black-budget government initiative that had quietly partnered with the Japanese Yakuza to cleanse Seoul of old-world power structures like Chindae's. They came with armored units, military-grade drones, and suppressed heavy weapons. They came with enough force to take a small government building. They had underestimated what they were walking into. Zora activated what she called the brutal protocol, a total environmental lockdown. The flooded basement became a kill funnel. The rerouted corridors collapsed options. The drones met jammers the moment they crossed the property line and fell from the sky like dead birds. She moved through it all with terrifying precision. No wasted motion, no hesitation. 30 men went into the basement level. The water came up to their knees. The lights went out. And Zora was already inside with them. She won. But it cost her. When she emerged from the basement, she was bleeding from her left side, a blade she hadn't fully avoided in the dark. She pressed her back against the stone wall, breathing hard, and for one single moment her hands shook. Not from fear, from the weight of what she had just done. From the part of her that Delta Force had never fully killed. The part that still counted bodies and felt the number. She closed her eyes, opened them. Then her earpiece crackled with information that changed everything. The mole wasn't one of Jindae's lieutenants. It was someone much closer. Jindae had a protege, a young man he had raised like a son, taught the code, given access, trusted with things even his blood family didn't know. That trust had been the weapon used against him. The protege had fed Void 9 everything. Entry points, guard rotations, Jindae's daily patterns. He had opened the doors that let 3 assassination attempts happen in 24 hours. And he had done it because Void 9 was holding someone hostage, Jindae's sister. Taken quietly weeks before the Red Sun activated. Held to ensure cooperation. A leash disguised as loyalty. Zora received the coordinates. The sister was being held 20 minutes from the estate in a secondary location. A skeleton crew, lightly armed, confident the main operation would be enough distraction. They were right about the distraction, wrong about everything else. Zora looked at Jindae. The math was brutal and both of them knew it. If she left to extract the sister, the estate's active defenses lost their operator. The web she had spent 40 hours building needed a spider. But if she didn't go, the sister died, and the protege, broken, guilty, already compromised, would have nothing left to protect. A man with nothing to protect is the most dangerous variable in any operation. She chose the sister. Lock yourself in the east room, she told Jindae. Don't open it for anything that doesn't sound like me. She was gone before he could argue. Behind her, on the ridge above the mountain estate, the main force had begun their climb. They came in a formation that suggested military training and absolute confidence. 40-plus fighters in the first wave alone, with a second wave staged on the ridge. Snipers, breaching teams, drone support. Everything a small army needed to erase one man from the earth. What they didn't account for was the building. Zora's web didn't need her to operate. It needed bodies, and the mountain estate was suddenly full of them. The pressure floors triggered in sequence, funneling the first wave into the blind corridors. The acoustic disruptors fractured their communication. Hand signals stopped making sense. Earpieces fed wrong directions. The psychological triggers she had placed in the walls did what psychology has always done to soldiers in the dark. It made them doubt. Doubt is slower than a bullet, but it's more reliable. The kill box in the eastern courtyard collapsed the second wave before they could breach the inner wall. The fire started in the western garden when a breaching charge hit one of Zora's rerouted gas lines. She had planned for that too. They weren't fighting a woman anymore. They were fighting the building itself. Fighting a mind that had walked every corridor, measured every sightline, and decided, calmly, clinically, exactly where each of them would fall. When the fire spread and the screaming stopped, 70 trained killers had not left that mountain alive. Then, through the smoke, Zora heard a voice she recognized. Calm, familiar, calling her real name. Not Vance, not Ghost. Her real name, the one she had buried. He had been her student once, 3 years ago, before the CIA burned her file and scattered her into the margins of the world. Zora had trained the man Void 9, now called their lead operative. She had taught him everything: how to move, how to think, how to disappear inside a room full of enemies and reappear behind the one that mattered. She had made him dangerous. Now he stood in the burning penthouse of Jindae's estate, waiting for her. No weapon drawn. He didn't need one yet. He knew her patterns the way a student knows a teacher, deeply, personally, in the muscle memory of 1,000 hours of training. You taught me that the ghost always survives, he said. But ghosts don't bleed. He had seen the blood from the basement. The fight that followed was not cinematic. It was not clean. It was two people who understood each other completely, trying to end each other. And the intimacy of that made it more brutal than anything that had happened in the gardens, or the flooded basement, or the kill box. She used everything. He countered everything. 3 times she nearly lost. But there was one thing she had never taught him: how to fight when you have something to lose. Zora had the sister. She had the exit. She had, for the first time in years, a reason to survive that wasn't just professional. He had a mission. Missions end. Reasons don't. She won. Barely. And she stood over him in the burning room, breathing hard, and felt nothing like victory. She felt the weight of what she had built, and what she had broken, to get here. 3 days later, Park Jin-dae died, officially. Publicly. A heart attack reported in 3 newspapers, and confirmed by 2 government sources that Zora had quietly ensured were on the right payroll. The Iron Emperor was dead. The Zhanhua Syndicate officially dissolved. What rose in its place had no name yet: a holding corporation, clean on paper, global in reach. Built on the bones of everything Jin-dae had spent 30 years constructing, but pointed in a different direction. Toward the architects of Void 9. Toward the government faction that had tried to cleanse Seoul by burning it. Toward every shadow institution that believed power meant immunity. The protégé was not punished. He was exiled, quietly, completely, with enough money to disappear and enough guilt to ensure he never surfaced again. The sister was safe. Void 9's involvement was exposed, not publicly, not loudly, but to the precise people who needed to know. The kind of exposure that doesn't make headlines. It makes careers end. It makes people retire suddenly, move countries, stop answering phones. Zora stood on the balcony of a building she didn't officially occupy, in a city that had no record of her presence, watching the sun come up over Seoul. She had come here to earn enough to disappear. Instead, she had become something she didn't have a word for yet. Not a bodyguard, not a soldier, not a ghost. The invisible hand behind something that might, for the first time in her life, actually matter. She didn't smile. That wasn't who she was. But she stayed. And in her world, that meant everything. If this story kept you watching until sunrise, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story coming to this channel is already darker than this one. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the invisible hand makes its first move. The ghost is just getting started.